This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, guys, let's get started. So in the last session we discussed about the historical background of SCCM. So SCCM started in the year 1994 as SMS 1.0, and the latest and greatest version of SCCM is MECM 2303. This is the latest and greatest version. This is released in the month of March 2023. Okay, MECM is what? Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. Now, we have three site servers as we discussed yesterday: central administration site, primary site, and secondary site. Okay, so we have three site servers. Now, these three site servers are separately installed. We cannot mix them together. They are installed on Windows Server. You can't install them on Linux boxes or Mac operating system. It has to be on Windows operating system. So, which operating system is supported? Windows Server 2012 or greater. So you can install it either 2012 or 2012 R2 or 2016 or 2019 or 2022. So central administration side, primary side, and secondary side. These are installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater. They need database. Each one of them need database. Okay, separate database. They will store the data. So for data storage, they need database. Now, central administration site is an optional site server. This one is mandatory. Primary is mandatory and secondary is optional. Maximum limit of devices you can have 825,000 in one central administration site hierarchy. In one primary site, in one primary site, you can have maximum 175,000 devices. Put yourself on mute, guys. And in secondary side, you can have maximum 15,000 devices. Okay, clear everyone? I'm getting background noise. Let me put you guys on mute. Mute everybody. Okay, so far we have discussed about the sites. Now I'm going to discuss about these site servers in details. So SCCM has three site servers we have discussed. Now we will discuss about central. So central administration side will be like this. It will be always on the top of the hierarchy. It will be on the top, like central will be on top. Then we will have primary, and then we will have secondary. Secondary will be at the bottom. Okay, bottom. Now central administration side needs database for data storage, right? Central administration site is an optional site server. Optional means it is needed only on certain condition. If you don't have those conditions, then you don't need central administration site. Okay, so central administration site is installed if you have such condition. Now, what is the condition? The condition is central administration site is installed when you have a big organization wherein you have more than one primary site. So suppose you have primary 1, and primary 1 is not sufficient because it's a big organization. You have more and more devices to manage. So we need minimum 2 primary, minimum. You can have 3 or 4 or 5, 6 primary site servers, 7 or 8, 10 primary site servers, but minimum 2 primary site is needed for a central to exist. So central comes into the picture when you have more than one primary site server. So it is an optional site server. It sits on the top of the hierarchy. It manages primary site. So basically, the role of this site server is to manage primary site server. Nothing else. It will not manage devices. For example, you have thousands and thousands of devices. Let's say there are 100,000 devices. The devices has got nothing to do with central administration site server. So central will always be talking to primary, nothing else. Okay, it will not be doing anything else apart from talking to the primary site server. It's an optional site server. It sits on the top of the hierarchy. It manages primary sites. It is required when you have more than one primary site. As I told you earlier, when you have more than, let's say, primary 1, primary 2, then you need central, right? Now, it needs database. So central administration side needs database to store the data. Now, what it will do, from where it will collect the data? It will collect data from primary side database. So primary side will also have database, right? Each primary will have database like this. Now, central is going to collect data from primary like this. So primary site is going to replicate the data. These primary site will replicate the data to the central database. Okay. So collect data from primary site database. Okay. It does not interact with client machine. So central has got nothing to do with client machine. For example, I told you there are like 50,000 devices. Central will not have any communication with direct communication with client machines. Plus, central will not be talking to secondary side. Secondary will be at the bottom, right? So secondary will always be talking to primary side. So secondary will have connection with primary, but not with central. Okay, understood like this. So it does not interact with client machine and secondary side. It does not process client data, and that's right. The data processing for client machines will always be done through primary side server and secondary side, not central. Does not support client assignment, and that's right. The clients are assigned to primary only, like this. Client will not be assigned to any other site, not secondary, not central. It will be always assigned to primary side. It can support up to 825,000 devices. So in one central administration site hierarchy, for example, you have this central plus primary plus secondary. So maximum you can have 800,000, 825,000 devices maximum. Now one central has a limitation. One central can have maximum 25 child primary site. So for example, you have central. So how many primary site you can have? Let's say primary 1, primary 2, you can go up to primary 25. That's the maximum limit. And it can be installed on Windows Server. So you have to have a like Windows Server. For example, this one is Windows Server 2019. So this is perfect fit for central administration site, or 2012, or 2012 R2, right? Or 2016 or 2022. So you have to have a Windows Server, and on top of it you can install central like this. So central administration site is an optional site. It sits on the top of the hierarchy. It manages primary site. It requires it is needed when you have more than one primary site. It needs to have a SQL Server database to store the data. It will collect data from primary site database. It has got nothing to do with client machine and secondary site. It does not process client data. It does not support client assignment. It can have maximum 825,000 client machine in one central administration site hierarchy. Mm, you can have maximum 25 child primary site, and it can be installed on Windows Server 2012 R2, 2012 or greater. So that's the central administration side. So you will not find central generally. Suppose you uh, join any company, generally you will not find central administration site server. Generally, central administration site server is installed in big organization like HCL, then IBM, right? Then there are multiple organizations like Wipro, right? Then we have uh, Cognizant, right? So big organization will have central administration site, because in big organization, one primary site is not sufficient. You will have to have more than one primary site. And the moment you have more than one primary site, you need central administration site server. So that's central, guys. Now you have primary site. This is the main site server. Forget about central, uh, because generally you don't have central administration site server. Primary is the one which is like mandatory. Okay, it is mandatory. Wherever you go, you will have to have some primary site. So whether it's a big organization or a small organization or medium organization, you have to have a primary site server. Minimum one primary site server is needed. If you don't have primary, you don't have SCCM. Simple as that. Now, primary is like a central, primary is like a heart of SCCM. So primary site server, you create all policies from primary side, right? You create the deployment from primary side. Everything is done through primary site server. Okay. So primary site will have database, right? And it is basically going to manage the devices in headquarter. Suppose, let me draw like this. Suppose you have a building in New York headquarter, and 50,000 devices are there. Now, SCCM is what? It is managing devices, right? So you will have to have a primary site which will be managing these 50,000 devices, like application deployment, update deployment, policy deployment, right? So it will be managing 50,000 devices, and it will also have a database to collect the data from these 50,000 devices and store the data in the database. So it will be managing devices. As you see, it is a mandatory site server. It manages client in well-connected network. Well-connected means the machines which are on good connection. So it will be managing those devices. It manages secondary site server as well. So why do we need secondary? Secondary comes into the picture when you have branch offices like this. Let's say this is Mumbai. Mumbai has like 2,000 devices. This is London. London has like 5,000 devices. So who will manage these devices? Secondary site server. So we will install like secondary one to manage all these devices in Mumbai, 2,000 devices, and secondary two, which will be managing all the devices in London. So 2,000 devices in Mumbai and 5,000 devices in London. So secondary cannot be installed without a primary. So for secondary to exist, you need to have primary. So first you need to have primary, and then secondary can be installed. Secondary is for branch offices. So it will be taking policies and contents from the primary itself, and then it will be passing those policies and contents to the devices. And secondary will also have database. Okay, each secondary will have database. Now this database will contain Mumbai computer information. This London secondary side database will contain London uh, device information, and the data whatever the data secondary collected, it is going to pass on to the primary database. It will replicate the data to primary. Okay, so as you see here, required SQL Server database. Primary site needs SQL Server database. Okay, it collects data from client machine. So primary side is going to collect data from these 50,000 devices, plus it will collect the data from these two databases, the secondary side database. So the primary side, ultimately this database will have Mumbai computer information plus London computer information plus New York computer information, because it will be collecting data from the secondary side database too. Now, then point number 6 is it replicates data to central. Now, in case if central is there, then only this point is valid. The central database, it's very crowded here. Let me draw again. Now, suppose you have this one, New York headquarter, 50,000 devices, primary site will be managing, and we have a secondary site, secondary one, which has a database, which is managing all the devices in Mumbai. For example, this one is Mumbai, right? Another secondary site, let's say this one is London. You have secondary two, and which also has a database, and it is going to manage all the devices in London. Let's say 2,000 devices in Mumbai, 5,000 devices in London. And primary site has a database. Okay, secondary also has a database. Now, whatever the data secondary collected, it is going to pass on to the primary database. It's going to pass on to the primary database, right? Now, primary database, this one is also going to replicate the data to central in case if central is there. If central is not there, then this point is not valid. So point number 6 is valid only when you have central. Okay, let's say central administration site is there. Central also has a database. So data, whatever the data primary collected, it's going to pass on to the central. But this is on condition. If central does not exist, for example, you don't have central, then primary will not replicate data anywhere. It will keep the data on its own, right? It supports client assignment. So clients are assigned to primary. It can have 175,000 devices. So number of devices in Mumbai, number of devices in London, number of devices in New York. So combination of all the devices from all location, maximum you can have 175,000 devices. That's the maximum limit. And primary side can have maximum 250 secondary sites. So primary site can have maximum how many secondary site? So let's say secondary 1, it will keep on going up to secondary 250. That's the maximum limit of primary site server. It can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater, just like Central. Okay. So see again, it is a mandatory site server. It manages devices in well-connected network. It manages secondary site. It needs database. It collects data from from client machine plus secondary site database. It replicates the data to central in case if central is there. If not, then it will not do that. It supports client assignment. It can have maximum 175,000 devices. It can have maximum 250 secondary site. It can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater. That is primary site. It is the main site server in SCCM. Now then you have secondary site server. Secondary, I told you this is for branch offices. If you don't have branch office, you don't install secondary. Suppose there is only one location without any branch office, then we don't need any secondary site server. Secondary comes into the picture when you have devices in remote location to manage. Okay, so it is an optional site server. It cannot exist without a primary. You cannot install secondary directly. It is not possible. You can install central first, then you can install primary first. Let's say you would like to install primary first. That's possible. Central first, that's possible. But secondary cannot exist without a primary. So first you have to install primary, then secondary can come into the picture. Okay. Even if you have central, for example, suppose you have started the implementation task. So you install central, right? And your plan is to install 2 primary sites later on. You cannot install secondary after central. That's not possible. Secondary is possible only after primary. First you have primary, then secondary. That's the only possible step. It's an optional site server. It cannot exist without a primary. It is used to manage devices in remote location, the branch offices computers, to control the network bandwidth. If you don't do that, for example, your primary is in New York. It has a database and it is in New York. It is managing these 50,000 devices. Now, what about the devices in Mumbai, which is like 5,000 devices? Mumbai, it's on WAN network, wide area network, not on LAN network. So if primary starts managing devices, if primary starts managing these 5,000 devices in Mumbai, what will happen? This WAN network will be choked up, right? You will not be able to manage the devices properly. It will be in high utilization. So the data transfer will get blocked and you will not have a communication properly. So we don't want that kind of situation. That is the reason what we will do, we will manage through secondary. So secondary is gonna take the policies and contents from primary, and it's gonna pass on the policies and contents to these 5,000 devices in Mumbai. Okay, so it is needed to control the network bandwidth. So secondary, for example, this is a secondary side server in Mumbai. So secondary cannot exist without a primary. Okay, and primary side is on in New York, for example. So primary side is going to supply the content and policies to secondary, and secondary is going to supply the content and policies to, let's say, 5,000 devices are there in Mumbai. It is going to supply the content and policies, and it has database. Secondary has a database. Primary also has a database. So whatever the information of these 5,000 devices, it's gonna the secondary is gonna collect the information and put it in the database. Secondary will store the information of these 5,000 devices in its database. Now, secondary site server needs database. Either you go with SQL Express or SQL Server database. Secondary can have SQL Express or SQL Server database, anything of your choice. It collects data from client machine. So secondary side collect data from these 5,000 devices from client machines. It replicate the data to primary side database. So it's going to send the data to New York database. I mean New York primary side database. Okay. It can have maximum for 15,000 devices. So maximum you can have under one secondary side. Okay. Let's say in Mumbai we have like another uh, another 15,000 devices. Okay. In Mumbai we added 15,000 devices. So we need, let's say this is secondary one. So we need one more secondary site, secondary one and secondary two. It will also have database that's going to replicate the data to the primary database. It does not interact with central. Central will be on the top in case if it is there. If it is not there, then that's not the case. But even if you have central, central will have a communication with primary, but it will not have any communication with secondary like this. And it can be installed on Windows Server 2012 or greater. So in basically what we have seen so far, primary central administration side, primary side and secondary side. But primary is the heart of SCCM. So you have three kind of architecture. Suppose you have small organization, small organization wherein you have like let's say 5,000 devices in Houston. Houston is a location in United States, and suppose we set up an office there, and 5,000 devices are there. So who will manage those 5,000 devices? We will install one single primary site, and that will be managing 5,000 devices. This example is called standalone primary site. Standalone. We don't have secondary, we don't have central. But in case if you have medium size organization, okay, in medium organization, okay, for a small organization this architecture is good. In medium organization you have headquarter plus branch offices. Let's say 5,000 devices are still there in Houston, and you have installed primary site to manage all these 5,000 devices. This is like headquarter, right? Now we have two more offices to branch of it. Let's say 2,000 devices in Seattle, 3,000 devices in Boston. So we need secondary one to manage these 2,000 devices, and secondary two to manage these 3,000 devices. And they will take the policies and contents from primary like this. This example, 99% of time you will see this kind of deployment in companies. Then we have third type of deployment, which is for big organization like Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, Cognizant, HCL. So central will be on the top, and you will have more than one primary site. Let's say primary one, primary two, and primary three. And you have secondary site server, right? Like this. And all primary will be talking to the central. This is for big organization. Okay, very rare kind of deployment. You will hardly see this kind of deployment in companies, but if you have more than one primary site, you need to have more than you need to have a central. Now I'm gonna open mic for you guys in case if you have a question, you can ask. Okay, so so I have given you permission. You guys can open mic and ask question in case if you have about secondary, central, and primary site server. Hmm? Sajat, AB, Arjun, Hanumant, Naresh, Pramod, Sai, Sam, Vasanta. No question
So,
from anyone? Hmm?
yeah, so the purpose of this central administration server, can we say it's like just to control the management of the primary sites?
Yeah, from a centralized location.
So it
Got it?
basically like helps you manage all these primary sites, but does not control the secondary sites, right?
Secondary will be managed by primary, na?
Yeah, but
Okay.
just asking the
So,
sole
so
purpose of a
central,
central
yes, a
administration.
central administration site is like, I'll show you. For example, you have two entity under one umbrella. For example, um, um, let's say ABC company. Company name is ABC. Now, under ABC company, you have two branches. For example, uh, Pepsi and another one. Sorry, what I'm doing. Let me delete this. So purpose of second central administration site server. Suppose you have a company called Meta, right? Meta is the mother company. Under Meta, you have like two offices. For example, Facebook, and another one we have is Instagram, for example. Now, Facebook has like uh, 100,000 devices. Okay, this company has 100,000 devices, and Instagram also has 100,000 devices. So, in order to manage this kind of organization, what we will do, we will set up one primary site. Let's say this is primary one and this is primary two. So, it is going to manage these 100,000 devices of Facebook. Okay, and this is going to manage another 100,000 devices of Instagram, right? Now, either you separately manage them, you will have one administrator, for example, Rahul is managing primary site and he is working on these 100,000 devices, is managing these devices through primary site one. And let's say Sam is working on primary site 2 is managing these 100,000 devices. So separately, you can manage them. Rahul will be responsible for P1 and Sam will be responsible for P2. But in case if your company decides that we have to have a centralized management solution, so we will install Central on the top of it, and Central will be managing these two primary site so that we will have one person, for example, let's say Peter, he can create policy for Instagram or he can create policy for Facebook. Um, he will be able to manage both the devices, Facebook devices and Instagram devices from central administration site server. Is that clear?
Yeah, Kash.
Any other question from anyone?
Yeah, Kashif, this is AB. I just want to make sure. So this is the Intune training on only SCCM. I want to make sure I'm on the right class. That's why.
This
Sorry.
no, you joined SCCM class. Intune class is starting after 20 minutes from now. Okay.
Okay, it's starting at.
So you mentioned that 7 o'clock, right? Ask Kosif, 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock Intune will start. 6 o'clock SCCM India time. I'm
Is it
talking in
6?
India time.
Okay then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 6 o'clock for SCCM and 7 o'clock is for Intune.
Yeah, but would it be so? That would be like within 1 hour, right? Or you said 20
One hour.
minutes?
No, it will start after 20 minutes from now, but that session will be for 1 hour.
Okay, so it's not. Okay, so in US time, do you know what time it's gonna start?
Which time zone you are in?
US. I'm in New York.
Huh?
I'm in New
New
York.
York EST. So New York is
Yes.
EST, Eastern time. So Eastern will be 9:30 for you.
Okay. Is it gonna be the same call here or no?
Same link.
Okay, I'll be. Thanks.
No worries. Okay. Any other question from anyone? Sai?
Kashiba, if you want to retrieve the machines from P2, right? So whether we can access from the P1 or otherwise we need to go through the central administration.
P1 will not have information about P2 machine. Huh? It's a separate.
Okay.
So suppose you have like P1, primary 1 and primary 2. So they will have 100,000 devices, for example. So these devices will be assigned to P1 and these devices will be assigned to P2. So uh, it has database and it also has database. So the devices, these 100,000 devices information will be there in this database, and these 100,000 devices information will be there in this database. Got it? They will have separate database. So P1 will not have information about P2 devices. However, central administration side database will have information about, it will have
P1.
information about P1 plus P2 both,
Okay.
because it is taking the information from this database and this database.
No, then when we are going to deploy the application, right? So we need to use the central site or otherwise we need to use uh,
Do it from central. If you have to deploy application, let's say you have to deploy application to both the location,
okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Do it from central. You have a console on central to connect. You can I mean, you can connect to the console, and then if suppose if you have to deploy, let's say Google Chrome to this one and this one both, then do it from central. Okay. Any question? No question? Okay. So fine. So typical architecture is this. Generally, we have this kind of architecture. Almost everywhere you will see this kind. You don't have central. Generally, you have like primary site and secondary site. 99% of time, wherever you go, you will find this kind of architecture. So primary site will be there in headquarter. Generally, we install in headquarter, but it is not mandatory that you have to have it in headquarter. You can install in any other location as well. But we are talking in general term. So primary side will be installed in headquarter. For example, New York. New York has like, for example, 10,000 devices. So primary side is going to manage these 10,000 devices and put the information in its database. So primary will have a database and it's going to store these 10,000 devices in its database. Now, what about the branch offices computers? So for example, 2,000 devices in Mumbai, another 2,000 devices in London, and another 2,000 devices in Paris. So primary will not be able to manage these devices. Why? Because they are on WAN network. So we will have secondary, let's say secondary 1, This one secondary 1, secondary 2, right, and secondary 3. These 3 site servers, they will have database. So secondary 1 will have a database like database 1, database 2, and database 3. So whatever the data the secondary collects, these 2000 devices data will be there in its database. These 2000 devices data will be there in its database, and similarly in its database. So secondary is going to replicate the data to the primary database. So this database, this primary database will have information about 10,000 from New York, plus 2,000 from Mumbai, plus 2,000 from London, plus 2,000 in Paris. So 10K. So this database will have information about 16,000 devices. This is general architecture. Almost everywhere you will see this kind of architecture, and our training is going to be on this one. We will do the uh, lab setup like this. We will have primary site, we will have database, we will have secondary site, and then we'll do the practical.
Kashif, if this is set up like this, you can still go with individual uh, primary sites, or this is a better way of handling it?
Sorry, I did not understand your question.
So this secondary site setup is just for segregating the networks and having an easier way of handling the entire thing, right? Or is there any other purpose of setting up a
Secondary
secondary
site
site?
basically is needed to control the network bandwidth. Otherwise,
Mhm.
the network will be choked up. So suppose you have some, for example, you have some devices in Mexico. Okay, Mexico, you have like only 200 devices. How many? 200. You don't need a secondary site. Why? Secondary side comes into the picture when you have more than 500 devices in that location. So 200 is okay to manage. So uh, we will install what? We will these 200 devices, primary side is going to send the policy. The policy will come from primary side, okay, from for these 200 devices. But content is like big. Let's say it's in gigabyte. Content is what? File, the application file, update file, operating system file. So we will have a local distribution point. I will talk about distribution point and management point later on. So policy will come from primary, but the content will come locally. So we will have local DP. So local DP will be taking the DP, I mean the content, it will download the content from primary side. Primary is gonna send the content to this DP, like a repository, and the machine will take the policy from primary side, and it will take the content from the local DP. But if you have more than 500 devices, so we will have the machine will download the policy plus content, both from the secondary side. Policy plus content, both from secondary side. Policy plus content. Clear?
Okay.
So secondary is needed to manage devices properly. Otherwise, the network issue will be there, and the device management will have a trouble actually. Okay. Then we have some site roles like management point, then distribution point, software update point, SMS provider, asset intelligence synchronization point, endpoint protection point, reporting services point, service connection point, and state migration point. We will discuss about later on. So these are some roles inside SCCM, like components. Okay, we will install, there are some mandatory component and some optional component. Okay, we have already discussed about this feature and functionalities. So basically SCCM is capable of doing asset management, client management, and administrative feature. We will do these practically so that you will get more clear picture. Now for lab setup, you will have to create your lab. So either you create your lab locally, just like I have done. I'll show you. So my SCCM lab is here on Oracle VirtualBox. Either you do it on Oracle VirtualBox or you can do it on Hyper-V or VMware, anything of your choice. Let me open again. So my SCCM lab environment is like this. I have a domain controller, a database, and this is my primary site server. Okay, this is SCCM lab, and I have Intune lab. This is my Intune lab. So this is domain controller, Intune, device 2, device 3, device 4. This is for Intune. So don't focus on this one. So focus on this one: domain, database, and primary site. So I have these three servers, and I will have one more client machine like Windows 10 or Windows 11, which will be managed through the primary site server. So this is possible. This kind of architecture is possible when you have good configuration. So how will you check your configuration, computer configuration? So you just type in search system information. Okay, so I have somewhere around I have operating system Windows 10 operating system. Okay, so on that, this is my Dell computer, and I have processor. This one is i7 processor, 8 logical processor. I have 8 logical processor. As you see, it is octa-core processor, and I have RAM. How much RAM I have? 32 gigabyte. Okay, so you need to have 4 core processor. Minimum requirement is 4 core processor. Okay, and minimum requirement for SCCM setup is 16 gigabyte RAM, 16. Okay, and the free disk, how much is free? So for example, if I take you there to my C drive, right click and properties. So I got 58 GB free. So I will, since I have already created SCCM lab, but in case if I don't have SCCM lab, so I will not be able to create SCCM lab with this free space, because free space is very less. You need to have minimum 200 GB free disk space. Okay, so that's the minimum requirement. So you have to have minimum 16 GB quad core processor and 200. Let me put 200. So 200 GB free disk space for local lab. In case if you don't have this configuration, then simply you just go to Azure portal and create your account. So like this, portal.azure.com. I will give you the step how you can create your account. So this is Azure portal wherein you can start a free trial like this, start free, fill in the details, fill in your phone number, email address, and it also needs credit card. You need to have a valid credit card. Just for verification, they are not going to charge you anything from the credit card. So free, 30 days free, and after 30 days, you can extend it to another 30 days. So basically, you will get 60 days free of cost, no charge at all for 60 days. And after 60 days, if you would like to continue, then you will have to pay to Microsoft. So here we will have like virtual machine. Right now, I'm not running the this one, the paid version or the free trial. That's the reason I won't be able to create virtual machine. As you see, I need subscription. So when I have the valid subscription, I can create virtual machine like my lab computers, and then we'll be remotely connecting to those lab machines. Okay, any question from anyone?
So are we going to get detailed steps on how to set it up?
Yes. Now, who will go on local and who will go on cloud? So I have Naresh, Sam, Vasanta. Hmm?
Yeah, hi Kashif. And, I want to go for cloud only, Azure cloud.
Azure Cloud. Naresh. Okay. Sam, you have good configuration?
Yeah, I will go
Hmm.
local.
Oh, what is the configuration you got?
16 gig, and then I have 500 GB hard drive, and then I have a quad-core processor.
It is it a SSD hard disk?
Yes, SSD.
Okay, good. So, okay. Um, Vasanta, Vasanta Kumari, Vasanta, you there? Okay, I don't hear anything from Vasanta. Yeah, go ahead. Can you speak, Vasanta?
Tasif, am I audible?
Yes, yes,
Azure, I'm go with Azure Cloud Data Center.
Azure Cloud. Okay. So Sajit will go on Azure Cloud. Hanumant, Azure, right?
Yeah, Kashif.
So there is only one person who will go the local one, that is Sam, right? Okay, 1 minute, guys. Send me your email address quickly, guys, on the chat window here. Send your email address. Okay, guys, so this is the email which I'm gonna send that to you to Sam, Sajid, Hanumant, Vasanta, Naresh, and Vikas. Vikas, you don't need this one. Okay, so I'm gonna send this email to you. If you are planning to do Azure, then you follow this one. So Sam, you are the only one who is going to do local, so you have to follow a step number 2. Rest everyone will have to follow a step number 1. Okay, I just send that to you. You will receive that email in few minutes. You have to follow that one and get ready. Create your account by today and get ready for tomorrow. Okay, before tomorrow's session, you have to have the account ready. Okay, step number 1. And Sam, you have to follow this one as step number 2. Okay, clear, guys? Everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Kaustubh.
Okay, fine. So we'll meet tomorrow. Now I'm gonna start Intune session. So I have to jump on another call. So those who are looking for Intune session, you need to join again. Okay.
Okay, noted.
Thank you, guys. Bye now.